Back when I was in 8th grade, my family was attending the local Unitarian Universalist congregation, and I was enrolled in the religious education program. The middle school class that I was in met in the basement. It was a big space divided up by cubicles, shelving, lots of fluorescent lighting, better than can be expected sofas, and mostly reluctant teens, like me, who were not there entirely willingly. Even though I am now obviously a minister, when I was a kid and a youth, I didn't really like Unitarian Universalism or going to church on Sundays. My parents would have to bribe us with promises of lunches and desserts after church, and even then, sometimes it was not enough. My reluctance may have just been me being a kid, or the congregation struggling how to appeal to us kids. But at least my conscious impression of the congregation was negative. I didn't understand how a religion could be open to everyone and not have a set of beliefs. I didn't see what the point was. If you didn't believe anything, or you could believe anything, why not just stay home? It's much more comfortable, and there's TVs there. Equally as perplexing were those who clearly had a really strong set of beliefs who went to the church. That congregation had a very active Wiccan group, for example. There are a lot of Buddhists and a lot of really confident atheists. What's interesting now for me is looking back is that this diversity, I think, is one of our best qualities. What I think could attract kids and youth and even young adults to Unitarian Universalism is this freedom to be whoever you are that is really special. For example, if you like the environment, here you can read the Green Bible. You can connect the solstice and the equinox and explore earth-centered spirituality. If you really care about social justice, learn about liberation theology from Central America, or the Jewish concept of tikkun olam, repairing the world. Or maybe you want to feel more grounded, and you learn to meditate and practice Zen. If Unitarian Universalism had a brand that distinguished us from other traditions, it would be our openness to other perspectives. This openness is not just about curiosity. It's about being able to grow into our fullest selves. It means not being tied only to one way of being, one right way, but open to a profound depth and breadth of the human experience, of wisdom, of God, of the sacred. We aren't limited as Unitarian Universalists. The whole world is there. We talk here a lot about the Unitarian Universalist principles, the 7 things that we affirm and commit ourselves to. But there's another list that we don't talk a whole lot about that is equally important. It's called the 6 sources. There's the 7 principles and the 6 sources. And the 6 sources are essentially the roots of our knowledge, how we know what we know, the places and the traditions and the people that inform our spiritual lives. They include everything from direct experience of the transcendent mystery of the universe, to humanist and earth-centered traditions, to Jewish and Christian teachings, and to the vast diversity of world religions. It's very expansive. It's very inclusive. It's why in service we can have Western philosophy read alongside Sufi poetry and alongside Christian scripture. And yet, despite all of that being really, I think, wonderful, there are challenges. It was clear even to me as my skeptical 8th grade self back in my religious education class. That year we were studying world religions through a program that was called Neighboring Faiths. I've served congregations who run this program, and it can be a powerful and fun and inspiring year. Class visits other faith communities. They get tours of local mosques and synagogues and churches. You get to attend their services, meet with different religious leaders of rabbis, imams, and monks, whoever is brave enough to be grilled by teenagers about their religion. Other religious traditions offer something similar, but I think it has a special place within our tradition as well. I would love to offer it for adults, even here at 4th U. And yet this class, at least when I took it, was pretty flawed. I didn't know it right away, but the one example that stood out for me was a unit on Presbyterianism. It was a denomination that at the time I knew absolutely nothing about. It blended together in my mind with Methodists and Lutherans and Episcopalians, something that wasn't Catholic and not evangelical, and all kind of sounded the same. I still remember the gold handout we received with the basic facts about the Presbyterian Church. It was part history and part theology. The overall message about Presbyterianism was that they believed in something called predestination. That was the idea that even before we were born, God has sorted us into two categories, saved or unsaved. It was as if before you existed, God pointed to your formless soul and said, I have chosen you to be saved. Congrats. Enjoy eternal bliss in the afterlife. Or, alternatively, God might point to your formless soul and say, I am sorry, salvation is just not for you. Eternity in hell isn't really that bad. To our mortal eyes, there is seemingly no reason why we might be put into one category or the next. You would never know what you are, and your actions in this life would not impact at all where you would end up. It's already decided. You could live a blameless life and not be chosen, or you could be a terrible person and still be saved. Worst of all, we were told that Presbyterians believed that hardly anyone was chosen. So mathematically, it probably wasn't us. If Presbyterians were right, we were all deeply in trouble. My 8th grade class couldn't believe this stuff. How could people believe that? How could people go to church and worship that kind of God? You can imagine my concern when later that year, my parents announced that we were moving from a Unitarian church to a Presbyterian church. Had they lost their mind? Had they been duped? Hadn't they taken their class on what Presbyterians actually believed? And it turned out, much to my surprise, that Presbyterians don't talk about predestination at all. Maybe they did in 1630, but the church that we were going to didn't mention it, I think, once in the 5 years that we attended. The ministers were exceedingly normal, rational, nice people, not at all interested in strange doctrines of hell or heaven. They seemed more concerned about good organ music and fighting for gay marriage in the church. I even looked this week at the Presbyterian Wikipedia article. Predestination isn't even there. So why did my UU religious education program teach me that Presbyterianism was all about predestination? I think it's because when you claim to represent the entirety of the world's religious traditions, the likelihood of not understanding them very well is very high. When you try and summarize an entire faith community that has spanned hundreds of years, sometimes thousands of years, has lots of competing factions and beliefs, one handout is not going to get it right. It wasn't even that Presbyterians were obscure. The two churches, the one I went to as a Unitarian and the one we went to as a Presbyterian, were 2 blocks apart on the same street and had been there for 150 years. There was no excuse. For all the beauty of our diversity, being a faith that centers the diversity of the world presents us with this unique challenge. How do we hold all this diversity kindly and accurately and truthfully when it is so easy to believe that we can represent everyone and every belief? Growing up, at least in my UU congregation, The world religions of the world were presented to us like a grand buffet. Take one out, try it on, put it on your plate, see which ones you like. And if you like one or you like two, then good for you. You know what religion you should be. Or just mix a little bit of that and a little bit of this. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with feeling connected to another faith tradition. That can be a deeply beautiful thing, and it is something that we do here. It is a powerful thing to feel drawn to explore something more deeply, to learn more about it, to do the work of becoming a sincere practitioner. Many UUs here and across the world identify with multiple traditions. There are Christian UUs, or Buddhist UUs, or Jewish UUs, or just UUs who don't like the phrase UUs and are just coming to services. Religious identity is fluid and dynamic and complex. But our relationship with world religions can't be that anything just goes. The first thing I think that we should remember is that Unitarian Universalism is not just a big bag of other traditions thrown in one big room. We are our own tradition as well, one that goes back hundreds of years with our own theology and history and culture that has rightfully filled thousands of papers and commentaries and books. We aren't just a collection of beliefs of other people. We have our own. We are part of what is called by scholars the liberal religious tradition, an association of ours of over 1,000 congregations and other communities across the world. Unitarians have a religious tradition that has contributed significantly not just to our country, but even to New York City itself. Our congregation alone raised Oscar Hammerstein, inspired Horace Greeley, P.T. Barnum, and the Carnegies, who all came here, as well as Barbara Giddings, who led the LGBT movement here in New York City in the 50s. Unitarian Universalists care about world religions because we believe, of course, that wisdom and spirituality are universal. We don't focus on them, though, because we're looking for a real religion to get. And this is where the tour begins. If we are here and we love what we have here, we have our religion already. If we forget this, we risk believing that other religions are just there for us, rather than remembering that we come from our own particular context and background. The idea that we could just choose something else simply because we read a book or Google it or took a class ignores how deeply complicated, nuanced religions are, how hard it is to understand something that is not our own, how much study and learning and relationship building being a religious person requires. We can't say, for example, that we are Buddhist just because we like to meditate. We can't perform an indigenous ritual if we aren't indigenous, even if we like the ritual. It wouldn't be ours to do unless you really are that, or unless you really have been welcomed into a community of practitioners. Religions are like other cultures. They are way too complicated to simply understand at a glance. They can be appropriated and taken out of context and used in ways that are disrespectful and harmful to those who love them. It's so tempting, of course, because other religions are appealing. They pull us in. Sometimes they want to pull us in. We want to learn from them, let them into our lives, let them teach us. And there is nothing wrong with that. Where the problem lies is using someone else's religion for our own needs, disregarding their experiences, perspectives, and feelings. At the best, if we do that, we become spiritual tourists, poking around in someone else's spiritual home for our own gratification, entertainment, and curiosity, interested only in surface-level understanding, trampling about carelessly before we move on to the next thing that sparks our attention. Even worse, we become spiritual colonizers. Instead of moving on quickly We embed ourselves within someone else's tradition and quickly consider ourselves to be their equal, speaking for the tradition as if it were ours, without first demonstrating a sincere desire to learn, build relationships of trust, of wisdom, and authenticity. It's why here at 4th U, I wouldn't lead a Passover Seder, because I'm not Jewish. It wouldn't be my place to lead that celebration, especially without those Jewish members of our congregation who would help lead it. Not only because I am not qualified, but because it is not mine to lead. Same would be true for a Day of the Dead ritual or leading an Islamic prayer in service. To do any of those things without being immersed or blessed by the tradition that we would be relating to would be to presume with arrogance. Without a lot of work, we could understand what we were doing. This is a challenge for us as a religion that is so diverse and so open and so welcoming. I love how we are. I love who we are. I love how many people can come from different backgrounds and traditions. We can bring the entirety of the world into this one room and say, you are welcome. Your experience is as real as anyone's. That is such a gift, not just for each of us, but for all of us together. And with that gift comes responsibility. To understand the impact of our actions, to respect the spiritual lives and homes of those we encounter together, to practice patience and humility and forethought, to really seek to understand, not as tourists, not as colonizers, but as learners and seekers and listeners. To approach other religions in that way is to understand that sincere relationship and learning is the only way to be together in diversity. Not in making claims about ourselves or others, not in trying to be anything that we are not in casually going from one thing to the next, but in the true meaning of religious journey, which is to begin in curiosity and graciousness and a deep respect and admiration for those that we wish to learn from. If we approach our faith from this place, then we will do okay, and we will find the inspiration, beauty, and wisdom that we seek together. May it be so in this community and the whole world. Amen.
Here at 4th Universalist, we take an offering each week. We do this not only to support our beloved community here, but to support the wider world in building a better world. That's why we give